Throughout history, royal marriages have been more than just romantic unions. They have often been marked by political intrigues, strategic alliances, and social pressures. While royal wedding ceremonies were usually grand and spectacular events, not all wedding nights were as ideal. In this story, we explore some of the worst wedding nights in the history of monarchies, where marital bonds not only failed emotionally but were also filled with anguish, secrets, and personal tragedies that forever marked the royal families involved. If you are a history lover, subscribe now so you don't miss the most fascinating updates from the world. Catherine the Great and Peter I of Russia. The marriage of Catherine the Great to Peter I of Russia was a splendid event. The young woman, who came from Germany, arrived to marry the unpleasant Russian heir but captivated everyone present with her beauty, elegance, and adaptation to Russian life. Empress Elizabeth of Russia had high expectations for her, as she did not trust her nephew, whom she considered lazy, a drunkard, a womanizer, and brainless. Catherine's disappointment began on her wedding night when she waited for hours for her new husband. Peter finally appeared drunk, lay down beside her, and fell asleep. The following nights were terrifying. At 18 years old, Peter was indifferent to his wife's beauty and preferred to amuse himself with small wooden soldiers and miniature cannons during the day. His toys were kept under the bed, but after dinner, when the couple went to bed, the door of the room was closed, and the fun began. While lying next to Catherine, Peter's eyes would shine, and when it was time to play, sometimes they continued until 2 in the morning. Henry II of Castile and Joanna of Portugal. Henry II of Castile and his brother Isabella of Castile, the queen who unified the Kingdom of Spain with Ferdinand of Aragon, also had a very difficult wedding night. The king was kind and gentle but had severe physical problems. Henry suffered from acromegaly, or gigantism. His hands and feet were disproportionately large. His head was abnormally big with coarse features, and he was very tall. In short, he was a gentle and intimidating giant, tormented by his physical defects and only happy when he was away from the public eye. Throughout his life, he had little contact with his siblings. Henry was first married at 15 to Blanche of Navarre. They remained together for 13 years but had no heirs. The marriage was annulled without being consummated. Later, a second marriage was arranged for Henry with Joanna of Portugal. Joanna was 16 years old and very beautiful, but like other European princesses, she was merely a bargaining chip to seal an alliance with her brother, King Afonso V. Interestingly, before his marriage, the king abolished the law that made the wedding night a public spectacle, perhaps sensing what was to come. Reports state that the couple's first night was not good. The king's sperm was deteriorated, and doctors had to manually stimulate him to obtain a sample. The result was considered sterile, despite an attempt at artificial insemination using a small gold tube inserted into Joanna with her husband's sperm. Although this was the first documented attempt at artificial insemination, Henry and Joanna's wedding night was an absolute failure. Henry's problems were enough to earn him a cruel nickname that also became a metaphor for his reign. Henry was known as the Impotent. The British royalty and the failed marriage of George IV. The British royalty has historically been a breeding ground for unhappy marriages. Charles I was linked to 56 illegitimate children. Edward VII frequently visited brothels, and everyone remembers what happened with the marriage of Charles and Diana. However, one union failed right from the wedding night, that of Caroline of Brunswick, 1768 to 1821, and King George IV, 1762 to 1830. The Prince of Wales at the time stubbornly refused to find a wife and only agreed when Parliament consented to pay his debts. Raised in a life marked by alcohol addiction and prostitution, his courtiers advised him to marry his cousin, Caroline of Brunswick, who lived a provincial life in her parents' principality. The marriage took place on April 8, 1795. Caroline declared that her future husband was fatter and not as handsome as in his portraits. The first impression was not good for either of them. George withdrew to the far end of the palace and drank a glass of brandy to calm himself. According to chroniclers, George confessed to his witnesses that he was marrying against his will. During the ceremony, he fainted twice and looked at one of his mistresses while saying his vows. Although the marriage was consummated, the wedding night was disastrous. The king, drunk, spent the night by the fireplace while his wife waited for him in bed. According to records from the time, there were only 3 sexual encounters between the spouses, one of which resulted in the birth of Princess Charlotte Augusta. After that, George announced that he would never lie with his wife again, not even to produce another heir. Maria Josepha of Saxony and Ferdinand VII of Spain. For many years, sex was one of the greatest taboos in Western society, leading to embarrassing and traumatic situations like the one experienced by Maria Josepha of Saxony on her wedding night with King Ferdinand VII of Spain. Maria Josepha of Saxony was a young girl under 16 years old when she was officially joined to the King of Spain in 1819. After the death of her mother, she was raised in a convent and had no knowledge of sexual relations. The monarch, on the other hand, was known for his sexual excesses and was obsessed with fathering a legitimate child to secure the monarchy's continuity. Before the wedding night began, the royal princess closest to the king would usually spend about 15 minutes with the bride, explaining what was about to happen. However, the wedding night was a complete disaster. Maria Josepha, terrified of her new husband, tried to flee upon seeing him. Big, old, and probably very aroused. Communication between them was nearly impossible, as she did not speak Spanish and he did not know German. Furious, Ferdinand called his sister-in-law and the most experienced lady-in-waiting to explain to the bride what she was supposed to do. After a brief conversation, the king returned to his room to attempt consummation. However, the young bride could not bear it and ended up urinating during the act. The king, furious, cleaned himself and did not touch his wife again for 8 days. Interestingly, the queen died 10 years later without having had children, despite multiple attempts. Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves. The final wedding night on this list is that of Henry VIII with his 4th wife, Anne of Cleves. Henry VIII had remained single for more than 2 years after the death of his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, in 1537. The search for a new queen began in 1538, and the king hoped to find a source of distraction and excitement. His wife was expected to entertain him and make him behave like a gentleman. The king ordered his ambassadors to find the ideal wife. The chosen one was Anne of Cleves, sister of the Duke of Cleves, an elector of the Holy Roman Empire. On December 11, 1539, Anne arrived at the port of Calais, ready to marry without having seen her fiancé. Their first meeting was unpleasant, and Henry made it known that he disliked his betrothed because she looked nothing like the portrait that had been sent to him. The marriage took place on January 6, 1540, and was only 23 years old, while Henry was 25 years older. Before the ceremony, the king tried by all means to get rid of his bride but failed. As expected, the wedding night was unpleasant. The encounter was a colossal failure for the king, who felt frustrated. They tried night after night, but the king's instrument did not work, and Anne remained a virgin. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to subscribe and comment on what topic you would like us to explore in the next videos.